Diane had no idea where her husband might be, and the debts were starting to pile up, making the situation even more difficult. It was then that the opportunity to work as a cleaner in a mansion appeared, a true light at the end of the tunnel. However, upon accepting the job, Diane discovered that this place held much more than just work, unveiling a reality that would change her life. Hello, my friends. I am Linda, and this is Linda Love Stories. I hope you enjoy this story. Diane had always been a dedicated and hard-working woman. At 35, she kept herself in shape, with shoulder-length brown hair and green eyes that reflected her determination. From a young age, she believed in the power of effort and perseverance to achieve her goals. Therefore, she dedicated herself to her studies and secured a stable job as a secretary in a pediatric medical office. Her life seemed to follow a smooth path except for one detail: her husband Robbie. He was the typical bad boy, rebellious, carefree, and full of charisma. With his tousled hair and contagious smile, Robbie won Diane's heart when they were still young. At that time, his defiant and spontaneous attitude was seen as attractive, making him popular among the girls. Years passed and the couple decided to get married. However, what was once seen as charm in Robbie now became a cause for concern for Diane. Her husband never managed to keep a job for long, always making excuses or getting involved in troubles. Robbie's inconsistency weighed more and more on Diane's shoulders, who found herself forced to bear most of the household expenses. Despite the difficulties, Diane remained steadfast in her work at the office. The welcoming environment, filled with colourful drawings on the walls and the sound of children's laughter, brought her comfort amidst personal problems. There, she felt useful and fulfilled, helping the young patients and their families. One seemingly ordinary morning, Diane woke up to find Robbie wasn't home. Worried, she checked her phone and found a voicemail from her husband. His voice sounded nervous and hurried. "Diane, a problem has come up and I need to stay away for a while. I made some bets and now owe money to some dangerous guys. I promise I'll sort everything out and come back. Don't forget about me, okay?" Diane's heart sank. Robbie had gotten into trouble once again. She felt a mix of worry and anger, questioning how things had reached this point. The video will be back shortly. In the meantime, we kindly ask you to consider giving a like, subscribing to the channel, and leaving a comment. The video is back. The next day, while Diane was working at the office, her routine was brutally interrupted. The door burst open violently, and 3 burly, rough-looking men entered, their eyes sweeping across the waiting room. The children present, frightened by the sudden intrusion, began to cry and hide behind their parents. One of the men, the tallest one with a scar on his face, approached the counter where Diane was standing. "Where's Robbie?" he asked in a threatening voice. Diane, trying to stay calm, replied that she didn't know. The man insisted, leaning over the counter. "You'd better tell the truth, young lady. Your husband owes us money, and we will find him one way or another." The atmosphere in the room was one of pure terror. Parents hugged their children, trying to protect them, while the children sobbed in fear. Diane, with her heart racing, tried to maintain her composure and protect the patients. "Please, gentlemen, this is a pediatric clinic. There are children here. I really don't know where Robbie is," she said, her voice trembling but firm. After a few tense minutes, the men finally left, not without casting threatening looks at Diane. As soon as the door closed, she collapsed into her chair, her hands shaking and tears in her eyes. The damage, however, was already done. The same day, Diane was called to the clinic owner's office. With regret in his eyes, he explained that after the incident, they couldn't risk something similar happening again. "I'm sorry, Diane, but we'll have to let you go," he said, handing her an envelope with her termination. Diane left the clinic feeling completely lost. Her life seemed to be falling apart. Upon arriving home, she encountered more unpleasant surprises. Neighbours, local shopkeepers, and even other creditors of Robbie approached her, all demanding payment for debts she didn't even know existed. To make matters worse, Diane discovered that Robbie hadn't been paying the rent for months. The landlord, an elderly man who had once been friendly, was now knocking on her door with an eviction notice. Diane had 1 week to vacate the property. Desperate and without resources, Diane began looking for a job. After days of fruitless searching, she finally found an opportunity as a cleaner in a mansion on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't her dream job, but at that moment, any option was welcome. The interview was conducted by Margaret, a middle-aged woman with grey hair and a kind gaze. The housekeeper of the mansion for years, Margaret explained the duties of the position, and to Diane's relief, also offered a small room at the back of the property, which she would share with Margaret herself. The mansion belonged to Charlie, a widowed millionaire, father of 2 children, a 12-year-old girl named Emily, and an 8-year-old boy, Thomas. Margaret told Diane that the children's mother had died during Thomas's childbirth, the youngest son, a fact that still weighed heavily on the family. Upon entering the mansion for the first time, Diane was impressed by the grandeur of the place. The rooms were spacious and well decorated, but there was a coldness in the atmosphere. The walls, adorned only with abstract paintings, had no family photos or personal objects. It was an imposing house, but it did not convey the warmth of a home. The first weeks of work were intense. Diane dedicated herself to her tasks diligently, cleaning every corner of the huge residence. She did not see Charlie, who usually arrived late at night, when everyone was already asleep. The children, on the other hand, soon approached Diane. Thomas, the 8-year-old boy, loved it when she took the time to play chess or other board games with him. Diane was delighted by the boy's intelligence and curiosity, always asking questions about the world around him. Emily, the preteen, initially appeared more reserved. However, gradually, she began to seek out Diane to talk about subjects she didn't feel comfortable discussing with others. Issues about changes in her body, doubts about friendships, and even her first romantic feelings were topics Emily trusted Diane with. One afternoon, while tidying Emily's room, Diane noticed something under the girl's pillow. It was a photo of a young and beautiful woman with the same blue eyes as Emily. "That's my mother," said Emily, who had entered the room without Diane noticing. "I look at her every night before I sleep. Dad doesn't like us having pictures of her around the house, so I keep this one here." Diane's heart ached seeing the sadness in the girl's eyes. She sat on the bed next to Emily and gently asked about her mother. Emily spent the next hour telling stories she had heard from her grandparents about her mother, her eyes shining with a mix of joy and longing. The housekeeper, Margaret, observing the positive change in the children since Diane's arrival, shared more information about the family. "Charlie is a good man, but the loss of his wife affected him deeply," she explained. "He became distant, especially from Thomas. I think, unconsciously, he associates the boy's birth with his wife's death." As the days passed, Diane felt increasingly like part of the family, even if in an unconventional way. She loved the time she spent with the children and strived to bring a little more joy and warmth to that big, cold house. One late afternoon, as Diane was finishing cleaning the living room, the front door opened. A tall man with broad shoulders and slightly greying hair entered. His deep blue eyes met Diane's, and both were momentarily paralysed. "Diane," said the man, his voice a mix of surprise and recognition. "Charlie?" replied Diane, equally astonished. The two had been schoolmates years ago, before their lives had taken such different paths. Charlie smiled, a gesture that lit up his tired face. "What an incredible coincidence! Margaret told me about the new cleaner, but I never imagined it would be you." They spent the next hour reminiscing about their school days and telling each other how their lives had unfolded since then. Charlie talked about his successful career, but also about the pain of losing his wife. Diane, in turn, talked about her work at the clinic and, with some hesitation, about Robbie's disappearance. "You know," Charlie said, "Emily and Thomas have been talking a lot about you. It seems you've won their hearts." Diane smiled, feeling warm inside. "They are wonderful children," she replied. "It has been a pleasure getting to know them better." In the days that followed, Diane noticed a subtle change in the household routine. Charlie started arriving home earlier from work, spending more time with the kids. On one particularly pleasant evening, he surprised everyone by organizing a special dinner in the mansion's garden. The garden, previously seldom used, came to life with tables decorated with candles and flowers. Charlie invited Diane to join them, insisting she was more than just an employee, as they had been friends. The children were radiant, running across the lawn and laughing in a way Diane had never seen before. During the dinner, Diane observed Charlie interacting with his children. There was a lightness in his behavior that she hadn't noticed before. At one point, their eyes met across the table. He smiled, a gesture full of gratitude and something more that Diane couldn't decipher. After dinner, while the children played a water fight in the garden, soaking wet and laughing incessantly, Diane and Charlie stood watching the scene, leaning against a nearby tree. "It's been so long since I've seen them this happy," Charlie remarked, his voice low and emotional. Diane looked at him, noticing how his eyes sparkled as he watched the children. "They are amazing kids, Charlie. They just needed a bit more attention and affection." Charlie turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. "And you brought that back to this house, Diane. I don't know how to thank you." The moment was interrupted by Emily and Thomas, who came running, soaked and laughing, asking the adults to join in the play. Charlie, to everyone's surprise, promptly accepted, pulling Diane by the hand to join the water fight. The following months brought a new dynamic to the mansion. The children's laughter echoed through the halls more frequently, and Charlie spent more and more time at home. Diane, in turn, felt increasingly integrated into the routine of that family. On a sunny afternoon, while Diane was watering the garden plants, a familiar figure appeared at the gate of the mansion. Her heart froze upon recognizing Robbie, standing there with his typical carefree smile. "Hi, my love," he said, as if he hadn't disappeared for months. "Your friend from the clinic told me where you were living. What a mansion, huh? Think you can get me a job here too? I heard they're looking for someone to clean the pool." Diane felt a mix of emotions, anger, hurt, disappointment, but above all, a crystal-clear certainty that she didn't want Robbie back in her life. She knew his character and nature well and would not allow him to enter the life of the family she had learned to love. With a calmness that surprised even herself, Diane approached the gate. "Robbie, it's over. You disappeared, left me with debts and problems. I've rebuilt my life, and there is no place for you in it. Please go away and don't come back." Robbie seemed shocked by Diane's firmness. He tried to argue, to use his charm, but Diane remained unwavering. Finally, realizing he would not succeed, Robbie stepped away, casting one last look of disappointment before disappearing down the street. Diane returned inside the mansion, feeling light and free. She had finally freed herself from the burden Robbie represented in her life. A few weeks later, on a quiet night, Charlie and Diane were talking, and the man admitted his relationship with his son, Thomas. "You know, Diane, I was never able to have a full relationship with my son. It's like there's an invisible barrier between us," confessed Charlie, his voice laden with regret. Diane listened to him attentively, her heart aching with the evident pain in Charlie's words. When he finished, she gently placed her hand over his. "Charlie, you are not to blame and cannot carry this burden. Neither you nor Thomas," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You need to face the grief for what is gone. Otherwise we get stuck in the loss and do not celebrate what was lived in the past and what can be lived in the future." Charlie looked at her, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. Slowly, a smile formed on his lips, and he squeezed Diane's hand. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice full of gratitude and something else. Something that made Diane's heart beat faster. The next morning, Diane woke up early as usual and headed to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. As she passed through the living room, something made her stop. The walls, once empty except for the abstract paintings, were now filled with photographs. There were photos of Charlie's late wife, radiantly smiling in her wedding dress, photos of her pregnant, lovingly caressing her belly, photos of her with newborn Emily. And, to Diane's surprise, there were also recent photos. Charlie with the children in the garden all laughing. And, in a special frame above the fireplace, a photo of all of them, including Diane, taken during dinner in the garden. Moved, Diane felt tears forming in her eyes. At that moment, Charlie entered the room. He approached her, a gentle smile on his face. "You were right, Diane," he said, his voice full of emotion. "It's time to celebrate what we've lived and what we can live." Diane looked at Charlie, her heart overflowing with affection. What the future held for them was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. They had both left the burdens of the past behind and were ready to face whatever lay ahead. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.